There is a moment right now before anything else is said where I want you to pause and notice something. Notice that no matter what is happening around you, no matter what bills are sitting unopened on the table, no matter what person has not called you back, no matter what diagnosis or delay or disappointment is pressing against your chest, there is still something in you that is aware of all of it. That awareness is not the problem. That awareness was never broken. And it is to that awareness, to that quiet observer behind your eyes that I am speaking now. Understand this. You were never taught the truth about your feelings. You were taught to treat them as reactions, as consequences, as things that happen to you because of what is happening out there. Something goes wrong, and so you feel bad. Something goes right, and so you feel good. That is the order the world has trained into you since childhood, and it feels so natural, so obvious, that you have never once questioned whether it might be exactly backwards. But it is backwards, and once you see how it is backwards, you will never be able to see your life the same way again. Think about this for a moment. If your feeling is only ever a response to your circumstance, then you are a prisoner of the world. You are a leaf on the surface of a river, tossed wherever the current decides to take you, and your only power is to hope the current is kind. But if your feeling is not merely a response to your circumstance, but is instead the very atmosphere in which your circumstances are grown, then everything changes. Then you are no longer a leaf on the river. You are the riverbed itself, shaping where the water goes. This is not poetry. This is the actual architecture of how consciousness creates experience, and it has been whispered by mystics, encoded in scripture, and taught plainly by those who understood the deeper laws of mind, though very few have ever been ready to hear it. The truth is, feeling is not the result of your life. Feeling is the cause of your life, and nowhere is this more important, more urgently important than in the moments when everything on the outside seems to be falling apart. Because it is precisely in those moments when the evidence of your senses is screaming at you to feel afraid, to feel despairing, to feel abandoned by whatever you call God, that the choice to feel good becomes the most powerful spiritual act available to a human being. Not feeling good because everything is fine, feeling good in spite of the fact that everything appears not to be fine. That is not denial, that is dominion. Let that sink into your spirit. Dominion was never given to you over other people, or over events, or over the weather of the world. Dominion was given to you over your own inner atmosphere. In the old scriptures it is written that man was given dominion over the earth, over every living thing that moves upon it. But consider for a moment what earth truly symbolizes in the language of inner truth. The earth is not simply soil and stone. The earth is the outer manifest world, the world of appearances, the world of conditions. And you, the conscious awareness reading these words right now, were never meant to be ruled by that world. You were meant to rule it quietly, invisibly, through the one territory that has always, only ever been yours, your own state of being. You must realize that your state of being is not a mood that happens to you. It is a kingdom you are constantly building, brick by brick, thought by thought, feeling by feeling. And whatever kingdom you build within will inevitably appear as the landscape of your life without. This is why the wise ones of every age, whether they wore the robes of prophets or the modest clothing of quiet teachers, all arrived at the same hidden doctrine. They said, "Seek first the kingdom, and all else will be added." They did not mean a kingdom far away in some distant sky. They meant the kingdom within you, the inner world of imagination and feeling, the private theater of your consciousness, where every future is first rehearsed before it ever appears on the stage of time. Feel this deeply. When everything else is going wrong, the invitation is not to pretend it isn't. The invitation is to remember where your true power has always lived. It has never lived in the circumstance. It has never lived in the diagnosis, the bank statement, the empty side of the bed, the silence of a phone that does not ring. Your power has only ever lived in the tone of consciousness you choose to inhabit while those things are present. And here is the part that so many miss, the part that once understood can never again be unseen. The tone of consciousness you inhabit is not a reaction to your circumstances. It is the architect of your next circumstances. What you feel today is quietly, invisibly drawing tomorrow toward you. Consider this. Imagine two people receiving the exact same piece of difficult news on the exact same day. One person collapses into the belief that life is against them, that misfortune follows them, that they are cursed, unlucky, forgotten by grace. The other person, feeling the same initial sting, the same human ache, chooses within moments to return to a quiet inner knowing that all is truly well, that this moment is temporary, that they are held by something greater than the appearance in front of them. Both people experienced an identical event, but they are no longer living in the same world. One has planted despair into the fertile field of imagination, and despair, being a seed like any other, will grow according to its nature. The other has planted trust, has planted an assumption of good, and that assumption too will grow according to its nature. Neither is naive, neither is denying what happened. They have simply chosen different soil for the same season. This is the secret of assumption, and it is far more radical than most people are ready to hear. To assume a feeling is not to lie to yourself. It is to align yourself deliberately with the reality you choose to inhabit, rather than the reality your senses are currently reporting. The senses were never designed to show you truth. They were only ever designed to show you the current state of a story that is still being written, and you, the one who feels, are the author, not merely the reader. When you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, when you assume the feeling of being well, of being provided for, of being loved, of being safe, even while the outer world has not yet caught up to that assumption, you are not lying. You are prophesying. You are speaking the language that the deeper mind, the subconscious, the fertile ground of all manifestation actually understands and obeys. Notice what happens when you try to force a good feeling through willpower alone, gritting your teeth and insisting that you are happy while your whole body is clenched in fear. It does not work, not because the principle is false, but because you have confused effort with alignment. The feeling that creates worlds is not a performance, it is a returning, it is the exhale after having held your breath for years. It is the relaxation of the entire nervous system into the quiet, unshakable knowing that you are held, that you are loved, that you are never actually separate from the source of all provision, no matter what the temporary weather of your circumstances might suggest. This is why so many teachings insist on rest, on ceasing striving, on being still and knowing. Not stillness as passivity, but stillness as the deepest form of spiritual authority. Allow yourself to see this. The kingdom of God, spoken of so often and understood so rarely, is described as being within you. Not somewhere you will arrive after death, not somewhere you must travel to through suffering and sacrifice, but within you right now, in this very moment, available the instant you turn your attention inward and choose your inner state on purpose rather than by accident. When you remember to feel good in the middle of chaos, you are not performing spiritual bypassing. You are entering the one place where the chaos has no jurisdiction. The world outside you can rage. The world within you, the moment you claim it, becomes untouchable because it belongs entirely to you and to the power that breathes through you. Imagine for a moment a lamp glowing in a dark room. The darkness does not reach up and turn off the lamp. The darkness simply exists around the light, unable to enter it, unable to diminish it, only made visible by contrast with it. Your feeling, your chosen inner state is precisely like that lamp. Difficulty does not have the power to switch off your inner light unless you hand that power over voluntarily, believing that your light exists only when conditions permit it. But that was never true. The light was never dependent on the room. The room was always dependent on whether you brought your light into it. You are not your circumstances. Let that phrase settle into you slowly like a stone sinking through still water. You are not the illness, the loss, the rejection, the delay, the fear. Those are events moving through the field of your experience, but you are the field itself, the vast, quiet, aware space in which all events rise and fall like weather across the sky. The sky is never harmed by the storm. The sky simply allows the storm to pass through, unchanged in its essential nature. And you, in your essential nature, are not the storm either. You are the sky. You are the awareness beneath the noise. This is not a comforting metaphor invented to soothe you. This is the literal structure of consciousness. Once you strip away every false identity you were ever given by fear, you are in truth an expression of the very consciousness that spoke worlds into being. This is why the ancient teaching declares that you are made in the image and likeness of that creative power. Not likeness of body, not likeness of circumstance, but likeness of function. As that infinite consciousness imagines and then experiences, so do you imagine and then experience on a smaller, more personal scale, yet through the exact same law. Every impression sustained in feeling eventually manifests as fact. This is not superstition. This is how dreams are dreamed, how visions are given form, how a single mother with nothing in her hands can still feel deep in her chest an unshakable knowing that her children will be provided for, and through that very feeling begins to move, speak, and act in ways that draw the provision toward her, often through channels she never could have predicted with her logical mind. This is why it becomes so essential, especially now, especially in the middle of your particular difficulty, to guard your feeling as if it were the most sacred inheritance you have ever received, because it is. Every time you allow despair to become your dominant tone for hours or days at a time, you are not simply having a hard moment. You are laying down blueprints for a future built from lack. And every time you gently, patiently, without forcing it, return to a felt sense of trust, of being loved, of being on time, of being guided, you are laying down blueprints for a future built from grace. The exterior world has no choice but to eventually arrange itself according to those blueprints, because the exterior world was never the author. It has only ever been the printed page. You are the author. You have always been the author. You simply forgot because the world convinced you to read the page as though someone else had written it. Consider this teaching once more in a different light, because sacred truths must be turned like a diamond, seen from many angles before their full brilliance is revealed. Every great figure in the old stories who received a miracle first had to feel the reality of that miracle before it appeared. The barren woman was told to prepare a room for the child she did not yet have. The man surrounded by enemies was told to sit down and eat a meal in the presence of those enemies as though victory were already settled. The dry bones were told to imagine flesh returning to them before flesh ever came. In every case, the invisible feeling preceded the visible fact. Not once did any true transformation begin with a change in outer circumstance first. Every single time, the transformation began the moment the inner witness shifted its assumption, shifted its feeling, and dared to feel finished, feel whole, feel arrived, while all the evidence still pointed the other way. The truth is, this is not a technique to master once and then abandon. This is a way of living, a way of walking through your days with an unseen crown resting quietly on your head, a crown that no circumstance can remove because it was never placed there by circumstance. When everything else is going wrong, remembering to feel good is not about pretending the wrong does not exist. It is about refusing to let the wrong choose your identity for you. It is about saying silently from the deepest chamber of your being that no matter what this day looks like, I know what I am. I know where I come from. I know what I am worth. I know that the source of my life is inexhaustible, patient, generous, and entirely on my side, even when the appearance suggests otherwise. Let this settle within you. Feeling good does not mean feeling nothing. It does not mean suppressing grief or forcing a smile over real pain. Feeling good in the truest spiritual sense means returning again and again to the undercurrent of trust that exists beneath every temporary wave of emotion. You can feel sadness on the surface and still hold trust in the depths. You can cry and still know. You can be afraid for a moment in the body and still remember in the spirit that fear is not your master. The wave and the ocean are not enemies. The wave is simply the ocean's temporary shape. Let your grief move like a wave, honestly, fully, without shame. And beneath it, let the ocean of your deeper knowing remain calm, remain sovereign, remain certain that the storm on the surface will pass, because storms, by their very nature, always do. You must realize that the entire practice of remembering to feel good is, at its heart, an act of tremendous courage. It is far easier to collapse into the collective agreement that bad news deserves bad feeling, that hardship deserves despair, that loss deserves permanent grief. The crowd will always validate your surrender. The crowd will always understand if you give up your inner light in sympathy with your outer darkness. But you were not called to follow the crowd's understanding of reality. You were called to walk a narrower, quieter path, the path of the one who feels good, not because the world has earned it, but because the world was never the source of that goodness in the first place. The goodness was always flowing from within you, like a spring beneath the ground, present in drought and present in rain, indifferent to the weather because its source lies deeper than weather can reach. Think about this for a moment. Every master of consciousness who has ever walked this earth was tested most severely in the very moments before their greatest breakthrough. This is not coincidence, this is law. The darkest appearance often arrives directly before the dawn, not as punishment, but as the final invitation to prove in feeling what you claim to believe in thought. It is easy to say you trust the universe when your life is comfortable. It is a different matter entirely to trust it when the outer evidence has turned completely against you. And yet it is precisely in that moment when trust seems most unreasonable that trust becomes most powerful. Because a feeling maintained in spite of contrary evidence carries an intensity, a spiritual voltage that a feeling maintained in comfort could never generate. This is why some of the greatest transformations in recorded history and in ordinary human lives alike have come out of what looked from the outside like the darkest possible hour. Understand this. Your subconscious mind, the deeper layer of your being where all true creation actually takes place, does not distinguish between an event happening in the physical world and an event happening vividly in your imagination, held with feeling, sustained with conviction. This is why an assumed feeling of relief, rehearsed sincerely in the quiet privacy of your own mind, begins to reorganize your subconscious exactly as though the relief had already arrived. And once the subconscious accepts a new state as true, it must, by its very nature, work tirelessly day and night, waking and sleeping, to bring your outer circumstances into agreement with that inner truth. This is not wishful thinking. This is how the deeper mind has always operated, quietly, faithfully, without asking your permission, simply responding to whatever impression you feed it most consistently. So the question becomes, in every hour when everything else is going wrong, what impression are you feeding it? Are you feeding your subconscious the impression of catastrophe replayed over and over in vivid, anxious imagination, rehearsing the worst possible outcome as though rehearsal were protection? Or are you feeding it, gently, patiently, the impression of resolution, the felt sense that this too shall pass, that provision is already on its way, that healing is already moving through your cells, that the reconciliation you long for is already forming somewhere just beyond the visible horizon of time? Both impressions are equally believed by the subconscious. It does not judge which one is more likely. It only responds to which one is felt most often, with the most conviction, in the most relaxed and natural way. Feel this deeply. This is why anxiety so often creates more of what it fears, not because the universe is cruel, but because anxiety is, in its essence, a vivid, emotionally charged imagining of an unwanted outcome. Repeated with tremendous frequency, it is prayer in reverse. It is faith pointed at the wrong door. And this is also why the simple, quiet decision to feel good, even in the smallest possible way, even just a flicker of relief, a flicker of gratitude, a flicker of trust held for only a few minutes at a time, begins almost immediately to loosen the grip of whatever difficulty you are facing. Not because the difficulty vanishes instantly, but because you have begun feeding a different signal into the deep soil of your being. And every seed, given enough patient tending, eventually breaks through the surface of the earth and shows itself as fruit. Allow yourself to see how practical this actually is, because so many people hear teachings like this and imagine them as beautiful but impractical. Philosophy for quiet contemplation, but not for real life. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is the most practical teaching there is, because it does not ask you to change your circumstances directly, which is often outside your immediate power, but only to change your inner tone, which is always, without exception, within your power. You cannot always make the phone ring. You cannot always make the test results come back clear. You cannot always make another person change their mind. But you can, in this very moment, choose to breathe a little slower. You can choose to remember a time you felt safe and let that feeling rise again in your chest. You can choose to whisper silently that all is well and mean it a little more than you did a moment ago. That choice, repeated patiently, is the entire mechanism through which every recorded transformation in consciousness has ever taken place. Consider this practical practice not as a rule but as an invitation. In the middle of your hardest days, find small moments, even just 60 seconds at a time, to deliberately recall a feeling of ease. It does not have to relate to your current problem at all. It can be the memory of sunlight on your skin during an ordinary afternoon, or laughter shared with someone you love, or the quiet satisfaction of a task well done. As you recall that feeling, let your body soften around it, let your breath slow, let your shoulders drop from wherever they have been living near your ears. In that 60 seconds, you have shifted your inner atmosphere, even briefly, and briefly is where every great shift begins. No storm was ever calmed all at once. Every calming begins with a single moment where the wind decreases just slightly, just enough to notice. You are not asked to leap from despair to ecstasy in a single motion. You are only asked to move 1 degree again and again toward relief, toward trust, toward warmth. A single degree of change repeated with patience becomes over days and weeks an entirely new direction of travel. And direction, more than any single moment, is what ultimately determines a destination. This is why consistency in feeling matters so much more than intensity in feeling. You do not need to feel euphoric to begin changing your life. You only need to feel slightly better than you did a moment before, and then slightly better again until slightly better becomes your new normal, and from that new normal, an entirely different set of circumstances begins to quietly assemble itself around you. The truth is, you were never abandoned in the middle of your difficulty. You were only ever unaware of the power you carried through it. The same power that has sustained the stars in their courses, that turns the seed into the tree without hurry and without failure. That same power lives inside your own capacity to imagine, to feel, to assume. It has never left you. It cannot leave you because it is not separate from you. It is the very substance of your consciousness. And so when everything else is going wrong, the deepest spiritual act available to you is not to fix everything at once, not to force an answer before its appointed time, but simply to remember who is actually doing the living through you, and to let that awareness soften your grip on fear. Let that sink into your spirit one more time, because truths like this are rarely absorbed on the first hearing. They must be returned to gently, repeatedly, until they move from something you understand intellectually into something you feel as naturally as your own heartbeat. You are not at the mercy of your circumstances. Your circumstances are quietly and patiently at the mercy of your assumed feelings, sustained over time. This is not arrogance. This is not denial of real pain or real difficulty. This is simply remembering the actual order of creation, the order that was always true, even when the world convinced you to forget it. Feeling first, form second, assumption first, appearance second, the kingdom within first, the kingdom without inevitably second. There is another dimension to this teaching that deserves your full attention because it explains why so many sincere people practice these principles for a short while, feel a small improvement, and then quietly abandon the practice the moment life presents its next challenge. They mistake the goal. They believe the goal is to feel good so that a specific outcome will arrive on a specific schedule. But the moment they attach their peace to a deadline, they have secretly reintroduced the very anxiety they were trying to release. True feeling, the kind that actually reshapes a life, cannot be rented for a single transaction and then returned. It must become your dwelling place, your permanent address, regardless of whether today brings the answer you were hoping for. The outcome will come in its own perfect timing, governed by a wisdom far more precise than your impatience could ever be. And your work is never to force the timing. Your work is only ever to hold the feeling steady, the way a lighthouse holds its light steady, whether or not a ship happens to be passing that particular night. Consider this. A farmer does not dig up the seed every morning to check whether it has grown. The farmer plants, waters, and then goes about the business of living, trusting a process that is invisible, silent, and entirely out of the farmer's direct control once the seed has entered the soil. Yet the farmer does not doubt the harvest simply because the field looks for a season exactly as it did before planting. The farmer has seen this law work before, season after season, and so faith is not a strain for the farmer. It is simply an accurate memory of how growth has always behaved. You are being invited into that same relaxed confidence. You do not need to dig up your feeling every hour to check if it has worked yet. You need only keep it watered, keep returning to it, keep believing in the invisible process happening beneath the surface of your life, even on the days when the field looks exactly the same as it did yesterday. This is why so much of the ancient wisdom insists on patience, not as a moral virtue to be endured, but as an actual mechanical requirement of the law itself. Nothing manifests instantly, not because the law is slow, but because transformation must first ripen fully within the invisible realm of feeling before it can safely emerge into the visible realm of form. A fruit picked too early is bitter and unusable. A desire pulled prematurely into anxious grasping loses its creative charge and collapses back into doubt. But a feeling held gently, consistently, without desperate checking, ripens exactly as it should and arrives in its proper season, whole and undamaged by impatience. Understand this as well. The difficulties you are facing right now, however severe they appear, are not evidence that you have failed at this principle. They are simply the current chapter of a story that has not finished being written. You are not being asked to interpret today's pain as final. You are being asked to interpret it as temporary, as a passing configuration of circumstance that will inevitably rearrange itself as your inner state continues to shift. Nothing in nature remains fixed forever. The tide that is out will come in. The winter that strips the trees bare will yield to spring. The night that feels endless while you are living through it will, without fail, give way to morning. Your task is not to convince the night to end early. Your task is only to remember, while still inside the night, that morning belongs to the very nature of time itself and cannot fail to arrive. Think about this for a moment, because it may be the most tender part of this entire teaching. You do not need to feel good perfectly or constantly or without ever slipping back into fear in order for this law to work on your behalf. You are not disqualified by having a bad hour, a bad day, even a bad week. The law is not a strict examiner waiting to fail you at the first sign of doubt. It is patient, endlessly patient, responding to the general trend of your feeling over time rather than punishing every temporary lapse. So when you notice yourself slipping back into fear, do not add a second layer of suffering by condemning yourself for having slipped. Simply notice gently, without drama, and return again to the feeling of trust, the way a musician returns to the correct note after a small mistake, without stopping the song, without abandoning the performance, simply correcting course in real time and continuing to play. This gentleness with yourself is not a minor detail. It is, in fact, one of the most important parts of the entire practice, because harsh self-judgment is itself a powerful feeling, and powerful feelings create powerful results. If you spend your energy criticizing yourself for not feeling good enough, you are still, ironically, feeding the subconscious a steady diet of inadequacy and failure, which will simply produce more experiences that confirm inadequacy and failure. But if you meet your own struggle with the same compassion you would offer a frightened child, gently guiding your attention back toward peace without shame, you create an entirely different inner climate, one where growth happens naturally, without the added burden of self-punishment slowing it down. Let this settle within you fully. You are allowed to be both a work in progress and already whole. These are not contradictions. The seed already contains within its tiny shell the entire pattern of the tree it will become, though nothing about its outer appearance yet resembles a tree. You too already contain within your consciousness the entire pattern of the resolution you are seeking, though nothing about your outer circumstances yet resembles that resolution. The gap between what you see and what you are becoming is not evidence against you. It is simply the natural distance between planting and harvest, a distance that time itself will close, as surely as it has closed that distance for every living thing since the beginning of the world. So today, in whatever your particular difficulty happens to be, whether it is the ache of loneliness, the weight of financial pressure, the fear surrounding your health, the grief of a relationship that did not survive, or simply the low, gray exhaustion of a life that feels harder than it should, I want you to remember this one thing above all else. You are allowed to feel good, not because everything is fine, not because you have solved the problem, but because feeling good is not a reward for a solved problem. Feeling good is the very door through which solutions walk.